to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Mckern. Join us weekly for tales of cursed media, haunted web series, ARGs, creepypastas, unfiction, and all things horror. Sit back, dim the lights, and welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave. Bonjour and bonjour, mon ami. Je m'appelle Ryan Mckern. Il est the Wicked Webs We Weave. And welcome back, my friends. Tonight's episode features two haunted locations, which I have both had the privilege of visiting. One in particular on more than one occasion that I find myself passing often as I walk through the French Quarter of New Orleans. And the first story is actually when I participated in a paranormal investigation. Seeing these locations in person is always more fulfilling from a writing perspective. It allows me to add more personal flair to the facts and occurrences documented. Because that could be the problem with some stories these days, all fact and no flavor. I plan on doing more of those very soon with location scoutings, including a trip to the Myrtles plantation in Louisiana. Our first tale brings us up the river to St. Paul, Minnesota, near the Mississippi, and above the once mob-frequented limestone caves, which still bears a bullet hole from the gun of one Al Capone. One local supernatural hotspot is the Mounds Theater. Built in 1922 as a venue for silent film and live entertainment in Valdivia, nearly 100 years later, brings the spirit of old and new to visitors alike. Multiple renovations, and home to many cultural outlets in the area of St. Paul, Minnesota's east side. My visit was in the cool autumn fall of 2014, late into the twilight hours. Greeted at the exterior was a beautiful restored marquee and classic black and white theater finish of color. The inside was dark, with only a mere light at the concession stand. At the front also was two old projectors used in film. They were really cool to see. It was also where the concession counter was that the restrooms are located, and the guides had let us know that there was a haunting spirit that frequented the women's restroom as well. So I thought that was interesting. Once inside the theater, it was dark, and the tour of the building once commenced. We were greeted to the tales of the spirits who still frequent the matinees of the Mounds Theater and offshoot parties. Their tales are as risen as the history of the building itself, which is to believe why they still come back to their beloved theatrical staple of rich history. Inside the lavish theater, too afar from the lush blue curtain, our tale begins of co-workers who passed away, but sometimes make their appearance into Mounds Theater. Jim and Red are the spirits who now might be still seen in the projection booth and balcony. Many accounts have stated they have seen the shadows of figures, apparitions appearing directly in front of them, materializing for pictures, stage curtains moving on their own, and it is said that Red was a projectionist who pays attention most to the blonde women who visit the theater. And I spent time in the balcony, actually, myself, in the projection booth. I had a camera with me, but did not pick up any orbs, any other phenomenons, spiritual encounters. But according to the staff at Mounds Theater, this is where a lot of the supernatural activity has been documented. Jim is said to be keeping the peace inside the theater. Sometimes voices and his spirits appear on the balcony. The projecting spotlight in the balcony corner is where I felt the most kinetic energy while taking the tour up this evening. The third apparition known by name was a young girl named Mary. The guide informed us briefly on the tragedy of Mary's passing. She is believed to be in attendance at the theater that fateful night. It is believed she was either alone or separated from her guardians when she was lost or lured into the alley and strangled. Her body was reported found in the parking lot across the street. Visitors and researchers account hearing many playing in the theater, and Mary can be heard speaking in EVP readings. Some even said toys and a child's ball rolling down the aisle without anyone else in sight. Statements have also been documented on an angry spirit which resides in the basement of Mounds. Scratches, moving furniture, and other physical disruptions caused the theater to temporarily close the basement that night. It is believed it is the spirit of Mary's killer. Today her case is still unsolved. At the end of the night, we witnessed the highest peak of activity, and the large stage curtain blew, closed on its own. It was nearly midnight, and perhaps the spirits were signaling that the show was over for our group. But the residency of the spirits live on to this day, as the show must go on here and in the afterlife, from now until eternity. And now follow me, if you will, back to New Orleans, Louisiana for our next story, the Sultan Palace Massacre. 716 Dauphine Street, New Orleans, French Quarter, is home to a legendary tragedy. For many years I walked by this known palace, felt the presence of spirits of the past, unaware until later of the years of the grim past within its walls. Built in 1836, one of the design specifications of Philadelphia-born Joseph Coulon Gardet, a well-achieved dentist in the Crescent City. Local architect Frederick Day would help the design of the structure in the 3.5-story mansion with raised basement to fruition in the coming few years. Gardet would then sell the home to a winning bidder of one Jean-Baptiste Lebret, a bank merchant and plantation owner. In the 1850s, Lebret would add to the ornate wrought iron lace which would be seen on the balconies to this day. Financial strains would befall Lebret and his family during the Civil War, forcing the family to lease the lavish French Quarter mansion while moving back to their plantation in Plaquemines Parish. Jean-Baptiste Lebret would be propositioned in New Orleans by a Middle Eastern man, stating his brother was a wealthy sultan. He expressed interest in the property, and this would offer a breath of relief to Lebret in this time of financial burden. Soon after the contracts were signed, a ship docked in the port of New Orleans. It was the Sultan's vessel. The Sultan's vessel contained women dressed in fine silk and luxurious fabrics, followed by the eunuch, men dressed in dark military clothing with bayonets in hand. Appearing next from the vessel was his brother, then the Sultan himself. Following thereafter was the royal furniture and the dazzling spectacle of riches. The Sultan would continue this procession down Jackson Square, past St. Louis Cathedral, and ended at 716 Dauphine to a luxurious party. Over the next few months, the mansion would be host to many late-night parties. Neighbors would account hearing music, loud clinking noises, and the scent of opium. Deliveries to the palace were made in front of the gate in exchange for gold the next day, and it was said that no locals were ever invited to the grand soirees. The festivities carried on until one stormy New Orleans night. Every residence and business in the French Quarter closed their shutters, dimmed their candlelight, and stayed inside during the rainfall. Wind howled mercilessly, lightning cracked, and thunder roared throughout the French Quarter, all through the night. The next morning, a man was on a stroll down Dauphine and Orleans Street when he stopped dead in his tracks as he saw a pool of blood trickling down the front steps of the Sultan's palace. Pools of red would form in the uneven cobblestone just beyond the front gate. The unsuspecting man ran to the police, to whom arrived shortly to the scene at 716 Dauphine. By now the blood had become a large flowing river outside, and soon the police opened the door in horror to what they had seen inside the house. Only a gasp of air could be heard as before the inside, like many corpses throughout the entire home, some flayed open, while others missing entire limbs. Amidst the carnage inside the mansion, they made their way to the courtyard. The metallic smell of gore and blood left some of the officers ill. Outside in the courtyard, however, the soil was wet and loose. They gasped as they seen a single hand sticking out through the soil, fingers spread wide as if clawing for help. The Sultan had been buried alive. It is believed by some that the brother was to blame, as his body was not found. Perhaps he hired assassins in a plot of revenge or envy. The case itself remains unsolved, and this is just one version of many of the story, which has come to witch of legend nowadays due to a story publication in 1922 documenting the event. Bank foreclosures would occur in 1878. In the 1940s, the mansion was home to the homeless, and then the Art Academy until the draft of WW2. From then it was then a home for the homeless until 1966, when the mansion was renovated and converted to 6 independent apartments by owners Frank D'Amaco and Anthony Viscaia Jr. The apartments remain today at 716 Dauphine, although under different ownership. The property is also a hot spot for ghostly sightings and tales of hauntings within, including the presence of the Sultan himself. Residents have reported seeing Civil War ghosts, noises inside without occupants, animals that disappear, and perhaps the ghost of the massacred themselves. Thank you again for joining me for the wicked webs we weave. I want to thank realhauntedtours.com, moundstheater.org, twincitiesgeek.com, jessicafreebird.com, realhauntedtours.com, ghostcitytours.com, wgno.com, and nolaghost.com, which were a few of the websites I used as research in the story. Not much else can be found as official documents in the case of the Sultan Palace Massacre, but I implore anybody to research, and if you do find any, please send it my way. Once again, I am your host, Ryan Mckern. This has been the Wicked Webs We Weave. And until next time, au revoir.